So I've been toying with this, branding myself as the adventure geezer for a while. You know, this is sometimes some people think of geezer as not a particularly complimentary expression, but I've decided a number of years ago to embrace my inner geezer, which unfortunately has become my outer geezer as well. So I figure this is who I am. This is who I'm going to be, and it really makes the point about the audience that I write for and the audience that I typically speak to is I'm not talking to kids. I'm not writing about adventures for kids. And you know, the younger generation, they're looking for different kinds of things. They're interested in adrenaline sports. They like bungee jumping. I mean, you know, well, bungee jumping I won't do. Zip lines, you know, I'll do that. But that's the kind of experience that I think is particularly attractive among the younger generation. But I think that older travelers are more sophisticated. They're looking for something a little bit more complex. They're not just looking for thrills. They're looking for some knowledge about the area. They want to know something about the natural history of the areas they're visiting, the cultures that they're visiting. They want an adventure or a trip that's going to appeal to them on a number of dimensions. So this is the focus. This is what I've been trying to write about for the last few years. So I also describe the trips that I write about as transformational travel. And the idea is that for me, if a trip is really successful, you're going to be learning something new about yourself and about the area that you're visiting, about the world around you. It might even change the way that you think about yourself. It might even change the way that you think about the world. So that's the kind of thing that I'm focusing on trips that are potentially transformative. Now, transformation doesn't mean a huge change, though it sometimes can be. And in fact, just a few years ago, I was doing interviews with people whose lives had been changed by adventure travel. And there were a number of people that I talked to, including people approximately our generation, who had major life changes as a result of trips they have taken. You know, leaving their work as lawyers on Wall Street, going to Vietnam to raise money for scholarships for children in Vietnam. And, you know, and there's a number of examples of impacts like that. So that's my focus, is on transformational travel. And my argument is that this is possible at all ages. It's not something that just happens for when you're younger, that this is something that can happen, you know, even when we're our age. And I'll use myself as perhaps the best example, at least the example that I'm most familiar with of that. At age 64, which was 7 years ago, in fact, yesterday was my 71st birthday. So I celebrated my 71st birthday by taking a plane, sitting on a plane, and then a hotel. So when I get home tonight, I'm going to start celebrating my 71st birthday. But at age 64, I was a dean of a university campus in Los Angeles. And also, just as an aside, my PhD is from Johns Hopkins, just right up the road here. So I lived here for 4 years. I lived in Baltimore for 4 years. And then for a couple of years after that, I worked at the University of Maryland, College Park. So I'm very familiar with this area. And the only reason I'm not taking a few days off to go travel around Baltimore and eat crabs and, you know, go to Corned Beef Row and all those favorite haunts of mine when I was younger is because I have another trip scheduled in 6 days to Russia. So I just don't have the time to, you know, relive my past in this area. But in any case, so I was an academic for 35 years, and through a series of events, which I could explain to you later on if you're interested in hearing, I dropped it all. I mean, this was a rather abrupt change, and I left my job and I started becoming a travel writer. And this has been a continuous evolution ever since then. So the travel writing, you know, has been, you know, I've been evolving how I think about the travel writing, but even more important, doing speaking now and also doing business consulting. I used to do business consulting before, but I have a different focus now. I use adventure travel as a metaphor for the kind of consulting that I do. Again, if you're interested, I can talk more about that later. So what I'm going to do in the next 45 minutes is tell you about several trips that vary in location. They're all over the world. I've hit on every continent and two on one continent. They vary widely in terms of location, the kinds of activities that are involved in the trip, the level of difficulty, and the level of effort required. So some of these trips may be a little bit beyond the pale for some of us, but I think that most of the trips are the kinds of trips that all of us can do, and many of you would probably be able to do all of the trips. And at the end of the presentation, I'm also going to provide tips for travel, tips on how to choose, how to prepare for, and how to manage the trips that you take so that they are truly, potentially transformative, or at the very least fun. You know, just because a trip is significant and has a profound impact doesn't mean it can't be fun. What I find is the trips that have the greatest impact on me are the ones that I have the most fun on. So let me start with the first trip here. And actually, I was talking about this trip with, I forgot your name? Susan. Yeah, so how many other people have been to India? Okay. And my guess is that you did the what they call the Golden Triangle, Delhi, Agra, where the Taj Mahal is, and Jaipur. I assume, is that, okay. And you went south too? You went north, okay. And my guess is, if your experience is similar to mine, after several days of touring the cities, you're a little bit frazzled, right? Was that no, you didn't have that experience? Okay. You try to stay away from the city. The cities are fascinating. I mean, I think India is the most interesting country I have ever been to, but it's not the easiest to go to. I mean, it's very, in the cities, it's real, you know, there's the movie, what's it, Marigold Hotel? And I remember the street scene, you know, where they're walking down the street, and it's somewhat sanitized. You know, it looked like sort of like managed chaos. But I know those streets, and what they don't show you, well, first of all, the smells, which are really overpowering. They don't show you the deposits of cow dung, you know, all over the street, and also some human, you know. So it's really, you know, after several days of touring in the major cities of India, there's a good possibility you're going to be a little bit stressed. You may not sleep all that well. You may be a little bit frazzled. So, as a respite from the chaos of India's cities, the tiger reserves in central India are just a fantastic change of pace. And you can get to them fairly easily. The two that I visited, Kanha and Bandhavgarh. Kanha has the largest number of tigers of all the reserves in India. And Bandhavgarh, which is a much smaller park, has the largest concentration. Now, I've heard stories from many other people who have been to India and did a day, you know, in the tiger reserves. So, first of all, it requires more than a day because the chances aren't great on any single day that you'll see tigers. But to maximize your chances of actually seeing tigers, Bandhavgarh is probably your best bet because of the high concentration of tigers. And the percentage of successful sightings in Bandhavgarh is something like about 90%. 90% of the people who visit Bandhavgarh will actually see tigers and actually have some fairly dramatic tiger sightings, which I'll describe in a moment. And Kanha and Bandhavgarh are only a day's drive from each other, so it's possible, you know, to hit both national parks. So, I should be pointing there, right? So, you know, after several days of touring in the cities, being a little bit frazzled, being a little bit stressed, coming to the national parks, it's like, you know, literally and figuratively, it's a breath of fresh air. I remember just driving into the park, and I just felt all this stress and tension of my travels in the cities just sort of melting away. And to me, it was like a big surprise that in a country like India that we associate with these teeming cities, that you find such natural beauty and such serenity, you know, all over the place. And this was my experience, you know, throughout the trip in these national parks. So it's great natural beauty, and also lots of wildlife in addition to the tigers. There's at least 4 different kinds of deer that you'll see. Those are swamp deer. This is a spotted deer, another spotted deer. This is what's called a sambor, which is a rather large deer. And there is a 4th kind of deer, which for the life of me, I cannot remember what it is. I'll have to go look it up when I get home. Also, this is an Indian bison. And birds. If any of you are birders, now I'm not a birder, but I can recognize when I see some pretty, colorful birds. And I've been told by friends of mine and people who I met on this trip, who are birders, that these tiger reserve has some of the best birding, in the world. Pardon me? Yeah. That one I know, actually. That's probably the only one that I know. And monkeys. Now, these are some of my favorite photos. Can you see that? That's a mother with her baby. And, they just sat still. And I was able, animals don't usually stand still for very long. And I have lots of pictures of blurry pictures of animals from various places that I've been. But they actually sat still long enough for me to actually get some fairly, dramatic photos. But it was tigers that we were there to see. For the first 3 days in Kana, we didn't see any tigers. And we're starting to get a little bit concerned. I mean, I'm enjoying myself, and I kept on telling myself, well, I don't really need to see tigers because, I'm having a great time. It's beautiful, I'm relaxed, I'm enjoying this. But, after a while, he said, yes, we really do want to see tigers. And the manager of the lodges that we were visiting was very anxious for me to see tigers as well because I'm writing an article about it. Now, how do you write an article about tiger reserves of India without seeing any tigers? I mean, you can write that article, but it may not be as much fun. In any case, this is our next to the last day. All the game drives are early in the morning, like at sunrise. In fact, you wait outside the park gates even before sunrise, and it's cold. You're wrapped up in blankets and you got hot water bottles. So it's early in the morning and also late in the afternoon. Those are when the game drives are. And the game drives are in these vehicles called gypsy jeeps. These are small jeeps that have an open back, 2 benches across where a maximum of maybe 6 people can sit. Now, what we were assured, now we're not saying, well, we're sitting out in the open, in these jeeps, and we've got tigers. Isn't this dangerous? And we were assured that as long as we're in the jeep, the tiger doesn't distinguish us from the jeep, and therefore sees us as being sort of inedible, I would imagine. But as soon as you got out of the jeep, then things would change. In fact, you were not allowed out of the jeep except at some designated spots in the park where there were toilets. So you did stay in the jeep. And so this is our next to last morning. We get up early, we drive out, and within a few minutes of getting into the park, we hear there's alarm sounds. The monkeys and the deer make these noises that the guides can recognize that these are sounds that they make when they're warning each other that there's a tiger in the area. So we stop and we wait silently. And then this tiger, a female tiger, a relatively large female tiger, emerges from the edge of the forest here and walks across the meadow. And I managed to get that shot before she disappeared back into the forest on the other side of the meadow. And then our driver and our guides move our Jeep up maybe about 100 yards. And because they're anticipating, they know, they've been through this before, and they suspect that the tiger is going to be crossing the road, in a minute or two, and we'll get a great shot, of the tiger. So we move about 100 yards up the road, and then the guide sort of pokes me in the elbow, pokes me with his elbow in the ribs, and points to the side, and about 15 feet away is a tiger, sitting there crouching in the bush. And as soon as I got my camera up to take a picture, even before I could zoom in and even get a good focus, she does what was later described to me as a mock charge, where she hisses, she gets down in that sort of attacking kind of position like she's going to come for us, and tear our heads off. But fortunately, it passed within a couple of seconds. It happened so fast, I didn't even have enough time to have an unfortunate biological accident, if you know what I mean. In any case, she eventually walked further up the road, or along the road, and then crossed the road in front of us, just a few feet away, and got on the other side of the road. Right before she entered the forest on the other side of the road, she stopped one last time to take a look at us and glare. It's sort of like, next time you better get out of my way, boy. or I don't know what she was saying, but we figured it wasn't very complimentary. So that was really the climax of our trip to India. And actually that morning, we saw 2 more tigers that morning. So we actually had a great sighting, and one other sighting almost as dramatic as this one, as the one I just described. Okay, next trip. Now we're going to move to Europe. This is a very different kind of trip. How many people have been to Scotland? Scotland's wonderful, right? How many people have been to the Isle of Skye? Okay, the Isle of Skye is great. I mean, this is one of the favorite destinations, in Scotland. But you can go even further, out. You can go even further west and get to the Isle of Skye is in the Inner Hebrides, and you can go a little bit further and get to the Outer Hebrides. And let me back up a little bit here, and go to the Outer Hebrides, which is of course right up against the North Atlantic, and this is as far west as you can go in Scotland, except for a group of islands off the coast, 50 miles off the coast, that they're called St. Kilda, and I'll tell you about that, in a minute. So this is really pretty far out there, but let me tell you, it is worth the drive to get out there, because first of all, there are very few tourists out there. The islands themselves are not that well inhabited, so now Scotland is not exactly a crowded place to begin with, but if you're looking for really remote, looking for really peaceful, and looking for some serious history, the Outer Hebrides is really the place to go. So the Isle of Lewis. Now, Lewis and Harris actually occupy the same island. Lewis is the northern end of the island, Harris is the southern end of the island. There is a string of mountains that runs right across the middle that separates the two. So they think of themselves as being on separate islands, even though physically, technically, they really are not. So Lewis is it's a very beautiful island. They're all beautiful. But the main attraction of Lewis is its historical sweep. Within one day, 40 miles of driving. So, you can drive a lot more than 40 miles in one day, but here you're stopping every few miles to go look at a site. You can span history from Stone Age settlements up until the modern time. There are Stone Age settlements, there are Bronze Age and Iron Age settlements, there are Viking settlements, and there are 18th century crofters' cottages. And so you just drive a few miles and there's another site. You get out of your car, you walk around, and you get an opportunity to see not only some fantastic scenery, which as you can see, because it's an island, because it's got a very rugged coastline, but it's really about the historical sites that's going to draw you to Lewis. That is, by the way, that's a Bronze Age hut that was reconstructed. So that's not the original. That is the original was on that site. There was a settlement there back, about, I don't know, it was Bronze Age I think it's about 1,500 years ago, on that site, and they reconstructed that hut. But the main attraction of Lewis are what's known as the Callanish stones. Now, the Callanish stones are similar in purpose and function and era as Stonehenge. But there are some very important differences. One of the differences is that the Callanish stones aren't as big. Now, how many people have been to Stonehenge? So Stonehenge is massive. Now, let me ask you, you are not able to walk through Stonehenge, right? I mean, you're able to walk through? Oh, it's part of it, like a special tour that you got or something, or? Oh. Was this years ago, or was this recently? Oh yeah, 20 years ago. Yeah, a number of years ago, you were actually able to walk through Stonehenge. What I've been told is that more recently, they now have a fence around it, and you cannot actually get into the site anymore. You just have to look at it from a few yards away. It's not that far. Well, in Callanish, there's no such restriction. Now, I'm not sure it's going to stay like that forever, but at least for the moment, you could wander around these stones. It's not as big. I think the tallest stone is maybe about 15 feet high, so it's not quite as big. But the setting, the combination of the setting and the stones and the fact that there's hardly anybody else around is a very atmospheric, creates a very evocative experience. And with just a little bit of imagination, you could stand amidst those stones and look around, and you could almost believe it's 2,000 or more years ago, and you're a druid, and you're getting ready for some kind of ceremony, on these stones, because that's the purpose of Stonehenge and the purpose of Callanish is they're astronomical observatories, and they also did religious ceremonies as well associated with those sites. So it is a very eerie and moving and beautiful experience. Now, the big difference, as I pointed out, between Callanish and Stonehenge is that you can wander around Callanish where you can't wander around Stonehenge. And the other big difference is, you look at those pictures, there's not a person in any of these pictures, right? Now, there are people there. Maybe when we were there were maybe half a dozen other people, and we were there for about 2 hours. So maybe over the space of 2 hours, maybe there was a dozen people who ended up showing up. So you get a very different kind of experience wandering through a druid, a Stone Age druid site pretty much on your own, as opposed to standing among, in a huge crowd looking at Stonehenge. So I don't mean to make light of Stonehenge. Stonehenge is incredible, but if you get the opportunity, head out to the Isle of Lewis to experience the Callanish stones. Now, Harris is very different. Harris doesn't have the historical sites that Lewis does, but in my mind, to me, Harris is even more dramatically beautiful than Lewis. And this is a view from the breakfast room of the bed and breakfast that we were staying at. And this is the kind of accommodations. This is where you stay. You can camp, but I assume you're sort of like me, and camping these days is only things that I only do that when I absolutely have to. If I can stay in a place that has a private bathroom and an opportunity to stay dry and warm during the night, I'll usually opt for that. So there are loads of bed and breakfasts, in Harris and Lewis, and this is pretty much, where you end up staying. So, and it rains a lot in Scotland, even in the summer when you're more likely to visit the Outer Hebrides. And so there's a good possibility you're going to be walking around and you're going to get wet. You wear rain shells, you wear rain pants and gaiters if you got them, but you're probably going to get wet at some point. But getting wet is not so bad if you have a bed and breakfast to go back to where you can change into dry clothes, sit by a fire and drink, a dram or two of the best single malt whiskey I've ever had in my life. So, you're not roughing it, when you're going to the Hebrides. So these are, again, I think extremely dramatic views. Again, this is another view from our breakfast room. And then you just drive around, and that's actually the biggest challenge in the Hebrides is driving around, because you're not driving on the wrong side of the road, because the roads are one-lane roads. And so you quickly learn, or if you don't quickly learn, you're going to have an accident. You sort of learn to look ahead, and then if you see, one of these pull-out places, you pull over to let other cars pass. So it takes a bit of attention and calculation, and that's really the biggest challenge of dealing with the Outer Hebrides. But wherever you go, whether you're stopping by the side of the road or whether you're going for a walk, you see scenery like this rough coastline. This is Lochs. This was just about 10 yards. We parked the car, just walked 10 yards in, and took those pictures. And as I said, this is from a hike that we did. Now, the last place I'm going to talk about in the Outer Hebrides, and this is even more remote, and this is even more difficult to get to, is St. Kilda. St. Kilda was a continuously inhabited community on an island that's the remnants of a collapsed volcano. And this community, this island had been continuously inhabited for over 2,000 years by a very remote community. And they finally abandoned St. Kilda in 1939 because they could not survive there any longer. They were barely maintaining a subsistence level, and they weren't even able to maintain that any longer. They lived off of birds. That was the main thing. There were some cliffs, which I'll show you in a moment, that they would climb down and capture birds and get their eggs. They grew some potatoes. They had a few scraggly sheep. They trade feathers, down, with fishermen for fish, fishermen that would pass by. So it was a pretty rough existence, but it's a fascinating place. So you take a boat, and the boat is usually scheduled about 2 or 3 times a week, and it doesn't run that often because if the weather is bad, it doesn't go, because you're basically going through 3 hours across the North Atlantic, and if you're inclined to seasickness, this is where you're going to get seasick, unless you wear a patch, and even then there's no guarantee. So it's a pretty rough ride across. Then you get to St. Kilda, and you can either do the guided tour, which is offered by the Scottish National Trust, which is the historical society that are responsible for preserving, places like this. Or you can do what I did, which is basically just wander. So I walked through the village, and there's a couple of these buildings that have actually been restored, so they look very much like they did during the days when it was inhabited. I walked through here and then started walking up what's essentially the inside of the volcano. And so this is from near the top of the volcano. That's the ship that we came in on. And so I sort of walked up, this way here. And behind me are these cliffs. Now, these are very dramatic cliffs. And this picture, I was back maybe about 8 feet, I think, from the edge of the cliff. To approach any closer, and it's very windy up there, and to approach any closer, I got down on my stomach, literally, and crawled to the edge of the cliff so I could lean over and take pictures, down the side of the cliff. And, that's how wild it was up there. And of course, there's nobody else up there. There's nobody living there. And the only other person who might be up there is somebody who came out on the boat with you, who was also ambitious enough to take a hike rather than do the guided tour. And this shows you the cliffs from the sea. So I think that picture was taken. I think I was standing just about there. So it's a very special experience, and like I said, it's not an easy place to get to because of the boat ride and the weather. But it's if you really are looking for something completely different that's really off the beaten track, this is the place. Now the next trip is Mountain Gorillas of Uganda. There's also a similar trip that you can do in Rwanda. Now this is a wildlife conservation success story. About 15, maybe 20 years ago, maybe 20 years ago at this point, mountain gorillas throughout. Then there's only one area of the world that you can find these mountain gorillas. They're in the Virunga Mountains, which is a volcanic chain of mountains in southwestern Uganda, northwestern Rwanda, and I think south. So it's where the Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, and Rwanda come together. Then there's this chain of volcanic mountains, and that's where all the mountain gorillas in the world are located. Now, about 20 years ago, these mountain gorillas were well on their way to extinction. They were being poached by locals. They were being poached by others who were coming in and killing them and selling off their parts for Chinese herbs or whatever purposes they were. And so a while ago, Uganda decided that this was a great natural resource, and so they created a tourism industry around the mountain gorillas. And then Rwanda picked this up, a number of years later once things settled down there as well. And they created an industry around it, accommodations, usually forest camps, like safari camps, and food, local suppliers of food, also porters to carry your packs when you're going, trekking, looking for the gorillas, and and other people who sort of service that. So that plus the fees that they charge, the tracking permits. The tracking permits back 5 years ago when I did the trip were $500 per day. That's a lot of money, but it's for, quote, the experience of a lifetime. So all of that added up apparently accounts for almost 50% of the gross national product of Uganda. So what that has done is it's created an incentive for the local people to protect the gorillas rather than to poach them. And as a result, in 15 to 20 years, the number of gorillas, in that area has doubled. And they are now relatively healthy. They're not endangered anymore, except in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where things are crazy. So things are not going well there. But in Rwanda And Uganda, at least, the mountain gorillas are staging a comeback and they are thriving. And I'll tell you more about that in a moment. But let me just also point out that Uganda, it's not just about mountain gorillas in Uganda. Uganda has a fantastic assortment of wildlife rivaling the wildlife that you're likely to find in Kenya and Tanzania, which are the neighboring countries to the east. So you can see everything in Uganda that you can see in Kenya and Tanzania, except that you don't need to fight with a dozen other vans or Land Rovers or Jeeps to get in a position to look at the animals. Every single one of these pictures, that picture, but every single one of those pictures that I took, we were the only vehicle, at that spot actually taking pictures, of those animals. There was nobody else around. And also lots of birds. For those of you who are birders, this apparently also is another sort of birder's paradise. Now, in Queen Elizabeth National Park, which is the main game park in Uganda, outside, other than Bwindi impenetrable forest is where the mountain gorillas are. In Queen Elizabeth National Park, there are 2 lakes, and there's a natural channel that connects the 2 lakes. So this is a major water source for the animals in the area. So you can take essentially a 2-hour boat ride from one end of the channel to the other and see more wildlife in those 2 hours than I think you're liable to see almost anywhere else in the world. And so we saw, hippos, we saw the Cape buffalo, which was the first picture, crocodiles, elephants. The only thing we didn't see on this cruise up the channel were lions. And apparently the lions come out in the early evening, and if the lions are out, none of the other animals are out. So, this is many animals as you can see without lions being around. But it was about the mountain gorilla. So let me tell you a little bit about the process, and then I'll show you pictures of the mountain gorillas. In fact, let me back up a little bit. Now, the process is in Uganda. There are the last I heard, there were 20 identifiable gorilla groups. Now these are like extended families. It includes gorillas that are actually biologically linked, and also others that have joined that particular group. Now the groups range anywhere in size from about 8 to about 20. Of those 20 groups, 4 of them have been acclimatized to human contact. So in other words, they're used to seeing humans. They don't get freaked out by humans. They're comfortable with humans in their presence. Otherwise, you're taking some risks if you run into, a gorilla group that is not used to humans. And of the 4, one of them is a research group. So basically, there are 3 groups of gorillas that you're able to go see. So you show up in the morning, you get assigned to one of 3 groups, maximum of 8 tourists per group. You have a couple of lead trackers. You have porters who will carry your packs. You don't really need to hire a porter to carry your pack, but it's a way of helping to support the local economy. And also, some of the trails get to be pretty rough. And what actually ends up happening is that the porters will get behind you, put their hands on your butt, and push you up on a particularly muddy section of the trail, or get on the other side and sort of drag you up. So they actually are pretty helpful. And even earlier in the morning, a bunch of lead trackers have gone out into the forest to find out where the gorillas or the gorilla groups are, because they move around. And then they radio back to the tracker who's leading your group, tells them where the gorillas are, and then you go off. So you start on a trail, and if you're lucky, you'll get to see the gorillas. It'll take you maybe about 45 minutes to get to the gorillas, maybe even as little as 20 to 30 minutes. But it also can take you as long as a whole day. I've heard stories about people hiking for 8 hours to go find these gorillas. But I think that's the exception. Most of the time, it's within an hour or 2 that you actually get to the spot where the gorillas are. So you start out walking up a trail, well-defined trail, it's not too difficult. But at some point, you're directed off the trail through the jungle, through the forest, and there's no trails there. And so, you've got vines trying to grab you by the ankles as you're making your way through all this brush. And sometimes you're actually down on all 4s, scurrying around, trying to make some headway. But then, and this is by surprise. I mean, I'm scurrying around. I'm on all fours. There's vines. It's really a bit of a pain in the butt. And then all of a sudden, I stop, and there is this guy, this silverback. This is probably the boss silverback. This is the guy who's in charge of this group of about 20 gorillas. He's standing there, giving me a glare. Now, you'll note that this picture is a little bit out of focus. I could say that it happened so fast I didn't get a chance to focus, but it's also very possible that my hand was shaking so much when I was taking this picture that may be the reason why it's somewhat out of focus. In any case, I settled down. The gorillas moved off about 100 yards to a meadow, which made it a lot easier to observe them. So for an hour, you're allowed 1 hour. Once you make contact with the gorillas, you're allowed 1 hour in their presence. The rule is you cannot approach them within 15 or 20 feet, but if they come up to you or if they come by you, that's okay. The last thing you do is if they come close to you, you don't turn around and run because that'll trigger a hunting response and, basically you're dead. So you just, and they're, they don't do anything. They're I won't say they're harmless because, I think a 600-pound gorilla or 400-pound gorilla is not harmless. But as far as I know, there haven't been any, incidents in all the years they've been doing this. So you basically you have about an hour to hang around, looking at the gorillas and taking pictures of them. Sometimes I just stop taking pictures and I just sit there and just say, I can't believe, where I am and what I'm doing. I'm in the presence and there's mountain gorillas, all over the place coming by. And at one point, I hear that. At one point, I hear a crashing. Does that mean, do we have a fire drill here? Do we have to actually get out of here? I hope not. Okay. So we can probably ignore this, I hope. In any case, at one point, I hear a crashing off to the right. I look over, and I see this guy. This is called a blackback. The other guys that you saw were silverbacks. They're mature males, and they're like us. They're older. They have a little bit of gray, on their back. So this is a blackback. So he's a mature male, but he's not old enough for his fur to have start changing color. He comes out of the bush, and he starts walking right by me. Now I put my camera down at this point. I mean, I wanted to see rather than take pictures. And he was so close to me that I think if I had stuck my foot out, I could have tripped him. I wasn't going to do that. But this was just an idea of just how close this guy was. So, and then, of course, it's not just about the silverbacks and the blackbacks, but there's also adolescents and kids playing in the bamboo. There's a baby suckling at his mother's breast. You can. I have hundreds of pictures, and I just picked out about half a dozen for this presentation. One comment: how many people have been to Africa? Okay, so you're familiar. Safari camps are pretty comfortable. You're not really roughing it in a safari camp. I think this is fairly typical of the kind of accommodations you'll find in most safari camps. This is a tent, yes, but it's a tent that's larger than some apartments that I've lived in. And it's on a cliff, and you could see there's a big deck out in the front, and what you can't see is that there's a watering hole just maybe about 50 yards in front of us, where we were able to sit when we weren't actually out on game drives in this particular park. We were actually able just to sit out on the deck and watch the animals come out around the around the watering hole. And all these accommodations, they all have private baths. And so it's really quite comfortable. You're not really suffering in any way if you're going to Africa. You pay a lot of money for it. I mean, Africa is probably one of the more expensive trips that you can possibly do. Okay. Now, the next trip, that's a relief. The next trip, now this is a trip that is perhaps a little bit more physically challenging than most of the other trips that I've talked about, and actually this one and the next one are probably the two most physically challenging trips that I'm going to be describing today. How many people have gone sea kayaking? I love sea kayaking. I switched Oh, it started maybe about 10 years ago. I started switching. I used to go backpacking, and it just got increasingly more difficult. My knees aren't so good. My back's not so good. You know, it's a lot of work. It's a real lot of work. And I started going sea kayaking. Actually, I started about 20 years ago, and I try and do a trip every year. And I find it to be the most relaxing outdoor activity that I can do, an activity that still requires a fair amount of physical exertion. So there's no stress on your knees, or very little stress on your knees. You have to hold your legs in a fixed position for a couple hours at a time, so that can be a little bit uncomfortable. And, you know, and if you have trouble with your back, it might not be all that comfortable sitting in the kayak for any extended period of time. But, you know, it's not terrible. And this is what you get. I mean, you know, this is, to me, I think a typical kayaking scene. You've got beautiful scenery. You've got, in this case, very flat water. It's very calm. And even if there's a bit of a swell, so what you're bobbing gently up and down on the swell. In fact, you know, I've fallen asleep. You know, I'd be kayaking, you stop, you just sort of are looking, and that gentle bobbing just sort of will lull you to sleep. So you know, now, of course, there are times when you're kayaking and things are a little bit rough, so maybe that's not quite so relaxing. But it's that you're in the water, and you're in the water at the level of, you're like a marine animal. You know, you're not in a boat, there's no motor going, and you really have a sense of being in the environment the way the animals that you're trying to see are in that environment. And so, you know, I really like that kind of feeling. In any case, this is a location. This is in British Columbia, Vancouver Island. Anybody ever been to Vancouver Island? Oh, so I don't have to tell you. Vancouver Island's great, especially for kayaking. And on the eastern side of Vancouver Island, this is the inner side, opposite the mainland of British Columbia. There's a strait that narrows, and it becomes a sort of a pinch point for orca that are migrating from south to north, and then later on from north to south. And there also is a submerged beach, maybe about 10, 12 feet underwater, that has large pebbles that the orcas like to skim against to scrape the barnacles, you know, off their stomach. So this is an area where you're likely to see orca. In fact, you're likely to see orca almost every day that you're in this area. And you're also the possibility of seeing them good exercise. I like this picture. It's just, you know, I know that I'm enjoying myself when I look at this picture. And also it's a great natural beauty. There we go, to the pictures of the orca. This is the reason we're here. So this is a picture that was taken the very first night. This is a 4-night trip, 5 days. And as we're unpacking our kayaks and beginning to set up camp, I hear the orca make a distinctive sound. It's like a sigh, you know, or exhale, or maybe it's a burp. I don't know. You know, I like sigh. It's much more romantic. And you know, I heard the sound, and I turned around, and a pod of orcas is swimming by. The next morning, another pod of orcas swims by, and this one was so happy to see us that he or she leapt up in the air in delight. And then, and as I said, we saw orca every day, sometimes from a distance. But a couple of days after those photos were taken, we're actually crossing the strait in our kayaks, and we could see them in the distance. You see the spouting, and you hear the sighing. And what you do is you raft up all the kayaks, because you're not allowed. You really have to stop, because you don't want to interfere with the orca. You want to give them a chance to essentially go right by you. And that's what they did, you know. And then we just waited, and I don't know, maybe this is 20 yards away, maybe 30 yards away. It wasn't that far, and we were able to watch them, you know, basically swim by. And these are two porpoises that were heading towards me as I was in the middle of the strait, and you know, they were coming right at me. And I'm sort of, are they going to hit me? And of course, what they did is they dove, you know, right before they reached my kayak, and then they resurfaced on the other side. But it was really pretty exciting. And all you hear when the porpoises are doing this are like this whoosh, splash, you know, in complete silence, you know, around you. So it's really quite an amazing experience. Lots of other animals up in this area too. Lots of eagles, bald eagles, and also black bear. Not lots of them, but there's enough black bear to keep you on your toes. This was a a picture that was taken of a black bear just about 100 yards from where we set up camp the night before. So he was pretty close to us, but we never saw him except when we were out on our kayaks drifting by the beach. And just to give you a preview, you know, if you're interested in this trip, this is one of the things that you would have to be able to adjust to, and that is sleeping in a tent, sleeping in a sleeping bag. It's on a platform, you know, you got pretty thick air mattresses. I don't know about you, I don't sleep as well in sleeping bags as I used to, but after a couple nights, you sort of get used to it, you know, and you're stiff. You get up in the morning, you're moving gingerly and carefully because, you know, it's, you know, I get up stiff anyway, even if I'm sleeping in a nice, comfortable bed. And so maybe, you know, actually, I'll tell you, the amazing thing to me on this trip, and I just did this last August, was after a couple days, I was surprised at how limber I felt. I hadn't felt that limber in years. And I think it's that constant movement of getting in and out of a tent, you know, you're crouching, you're bending, you're moving, you're walking up and down a hill to get to the tent, you're carrying the kayaks. You know, it was more varied movement than you know, I mean, I go to the gym, you know, regularly, but it's always the same movements. And so I think it was that constant movement of my body. By the second or third day, I felt loose. I felt limber, you know, and at age 70, I mean, you know, I wasn't really expecting to feel limber and loose, you know, at this point in my life. And I think part of it is because of this kind of environment, that if you manage to get through the first couple of days, you know, then you become, you know, you sort of adapt to the situation, and it becomes a lot easier to deal with. Okay, the next trip, this is the most difficult trip of all the ones I'm going to be describing. This is what I'm sorry, I have a different version here, so these are not synced up. So this is a lodge-to-lodge trek to Machu Picchu in Peru. I just came back from this trip maybe 10 days ago, so I'm still, you know, I lost a few pounds, so I'm enjoying you know, the feeling of being a little bit lighter. It's not going to last, I know that, but you know, I'm enjoying it for now anyway. I like to describe this trip as the adult version of the Inca Trail. Now, I think I've talked to a couple people who have actually been on the Inca Trail, and I'm sure many of you have heard about the Inca Trail. The Inca Trail is the usual trek into Machu Picchu, and it's a great trip. I did this, you know, about 16 years ago with my wife, and at that time, we were the oldest by 30 years of anybody else in our group. We were the mama and papa of the group that we were with, and that's pretty typical. Most of the people on the Inca Trail these days are backpackers in their 20s and maybe 30s. The camping conditions are not that great. You know, you're sleeping in a tent. They're crowded. You know, I found them to be crowded campgrounds, and there's you know, funky toilets. I mean, it wasn't. You know, it's the beauty of the Andes, and it's the ruins that you see along the way that draw people to the Inca. At least drew me to the Inca Trail. It surely wasn't, you know, the camping conditions. So ever since I heard about the Mountain Lodges of Peru trip, which goes on the Salcantay Trail as opposed to the Inca Trail. So this is a different trail that runs in pretty much the same, you know, area. I've been wanting to do this trek, and I had the opportunity to do this just a couple of weeks ago. So this gives you an idea of what this trek is like. So it's let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-day trek, and then there's a hotel at the back end. So it's about 6 days. So the first 2 days of this trek, you're staying at this lodge, and then for the next 3 days, you're staying at 3 different lodges. All of the lodges except one have a great outdoor jacuzzi. So this sort of gives you an idea of the yin and yang of this trip, because here you are sitting. Here we go, sitting in this fantastic jacuzzi. Oh, okay. And you know, sitting here, you know, drinking a cold beer. You know, the barman. You know, every one of these lodges has a kitchen. The chef travels with you on this trek. You know, so you get service. You get, you know, pisco sours. This is a pisco sour here. But in 2 days from when this picture was taken, we're going to be walking down this valley, through here, up this, behind this ridge here, and up behind that mountain, around this mountain here. So that's the big day of that trip. It's a big, you're crossing a pass at 15,230 feet, which is very high altitude, and and you're going up about 2,700 feet to get there. So this really requires being in very good shape. There is an alternative. You can ride a horse. And in fact, what they do is on the first day, which is the day after this picture was taken, they take you on, that's the mountain at the end of the valley. They take you on a hike up to a lake above the lodge and back again. They call it an acclimatization hike to try and get you used to the altitude. But really what it is they're checking you out. They want to see whether you can manage that hike. And what they're likely to do at the end of that day is to pull a couple of people aside and say, listen, we don't think you can do this hike. We strongly recommend that you hire a horse for this trek. And that's what happened to a couple of people that were in our group. And that worked out fine. And for one of them, he got off the horse, went hiking for a bit. Then when he was really tired, he'd get back on the horse. So, you can do a combination of the two. So this was the acclimatization hike, which is, you can see, fantastic scenery. You're climbing up to this lake, in this cirque surrounded by these mountains. But the big event is the first day that you're actually going out, because that's the day you're going to be crossing the Salcantay Pass. And so you could see, actually, the lodge is down there. You can't quite make it out, but it's there. So you're following up this trail here, up here. You're constantly going up. You're constantly going up, constantly going up. And then you get to these switchbacks, and that's really the killer. And there's people riding horses down, down at that point. So the elevation gain is about 2,700 feet, at high altitude. And I can tell you, I've been pretty active. I've done outdoor activities pretty much my whole life. This was maybe the single most difficult 4 hours of physical activity of my life. My heart was pounding. Every muscle was screaming. I wasn't sure that I'm looking around, where can they land the helicopter? This is pretty much, and I'm only, they say, we're only 200 meters from the top. And I say, 200 meters times 3, 600 feet. That's not so close, and that's the way it felt to me. This was, that 600 feet took about at least an hour, maybe more, and it was the toughest hour I think I've ever had. But in any case, I made it. And so this is the top of the pass, and this might look like a smile to you, but let me assure you, it's a grimace. I have a much better smile than that, but that's about all that I can manage at that point. And at this point, we're now going downhill. And downhill isn't that much easier on me than going uphill. So instead of puffing, puffing is way too tame of an expression to describe what I was going through. But you're walking downhill on a rocky trail. You have to watch your footing. It's reasonably steep, and you really feel it, on your knees after a while. And that's pretty much, there were easy days on this trek, and there were difficult days. That was the most difficult day, but that wasn't the only difficult day. But this is the reason, you do stuff like this. We're surrounded by this stunning scenery. Now, and I know I've said this about a lot of places. Oh, some of the most beautiful scenery I've ever seen. Well, this is some of the most beautiful scenery I've ever seen. Maybe not the most. Then you start getting into some, ridiculous comparisons. But it's breathtaking scenery. And to be in the middle of it, as opposed to actually just looking at photos of it. This is what I realized. What makes the Andes so special? It's the mist and the clouds. The mist is constantly settling in, or there might be fingers of mist that work themselves between a couple mountains through a valley, and then it lifts. The scene is constantly changing. You take a look at that, and about 15, 20 minutes later, about 15, 20 minutes later, it's a completely different scene. So it's just never, the variety of the views just never ceases. But it's not just about the views. I mean, there are some spectacular flowers. There is a orchid forest adjoining one of the lodges, and we had a chance to go walking through the forest and taking pictures of these special orchids. This is actually, you can't quite see it, but we're actually looking to Machu Picchu from the other side. This is a view of Machu Picchu that hardly anybody ever gets to see, because it's from this trail rather than from the usual vantage points that you normally get to see. Some more orchids. And then these are the accommodations. Again, very comfortable, private baths, great food, fully stocked bar, and jacuzzi. So, that's the irony of it. I mean, you're really working hard during the day, but you get to the lodge, and the first thing we did, take a fast shower, change into the bathing suit, and get into that jacuzzi and order, a beer. So it seemed to make everything worthwhile. Now, and that's a picture of one of the lodges, so it does give you an idea of what these lodges look like. But it's Machu Picchu. So this trek doesn't actually take you to Machu Picchu. It takes you to a train station that's the last stop on the train that goes to Machu Picchu. So you get on the train and you go back in the other direction towards Cusco, and it's like just one stop away, maybe about 20, 25 minutes, on the train. You get into Aguas Caliente, which is at the bottom of the hill. You stay in this trek here, the Mountain Lodges of Peru. You stay at the Inca Terra Hotel in Aguas Caliente, which has been rated one of the top hotels in the world by a number of different magazines, and I would reinforce that. It was a great place to stay. And then the next morning, you get on the bus and you go up and you visit Machu Picchu. And if you're smart, you get up as early as you possibly can and get on the 6 o'clock bus, because that's when the buses start running, so that you can get up there before the crowds descend on Machu Picchu. So you have an opportunity to wander around and take pictures of Machu Picchu like this. Now, there are some people, in these pictures. Actually, it's hard to see, but there are, but not very many. And Machu Picchu is, I think, maybe the single most stunning man-made wonder, that I've ever seen. I've been there twice, and it never loses its appeal. Okay, this is the next to last trip. This one is actually quite easy. So this is a bit of change of pace from Peru, from the Salcantay Trail. South Australia. Now this is an area. The way you get to South Australia is you fly to Adelaide. So Adelaide is sort of the heart, the capital of South Australia. And there's actually two places that I'm going to talk about in South Australia. So you land in Adelaide, and you go north about an hour, maybe 2 hours. I don't remember exactly how long it was, but it's very, very close. And you get to the Barossa Valley. Now, is that name familiar to anybody here? Are there any wine experts here? Yeah, the Barossa Valley, I've been told, I'm not really a wine expert, but my wife is, and the Barossa Valley is known for very, very fine wines. And that's what the Barossa Valley is. It's the Napa Valley of Australia. Except for my money, it's better than Napa Valley because it's not crowded. So this picture, for me, captures the essence of the Barossa Valley. You've got food, great food, fantastic food. You got great wine, and you got nice views. And then here's another picture it gives you. So it's that same kind of countryside that you're likely to see, I guess, in other wine-growing regions. France, California, sort of rolling hills, very, very pretty. But the main attraction is the wine and the food. So you're going to live quite well in the Barossa Valley. But Kangaroo Island was really the destination that I was really most interested in. So if you go south from Adelaide, I think it's about an hour and a half drive. Catch a ferry, take you over to Kangaroo Island, or you can fly, directly to Kangaroo Island. So it's relatively easy to get to, though not cheap. Nothing in Australia is cheap. So this is, to me, the biggest challenge of Australia is the expense. Things have been going very well in Australia in recent years. Prices are sky high. The Australian dollar used to be very favorable compared to the American dollar, not so much anymore. So I don't want to discourage anybody from going to Australia. I think Australia is great. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking about it. But I do need to warn you that it's going to cost you a bit of money. In any case, Kangaroo Island is very pretty, and there's hardly any people there. It's a big island. There's not that many inhabitants, and there's not that many tourists, touring around. This is actually, there's not that many not that many roads in Kangaroo Island, and this is I won't call it a major highway. It's not a major highway, but it is, it is the only road that's connecting one point and another, and this is the middle of the afternoon. So, as you can see, this is not exactly rush hour in Los Angeles. And then you have a great coastline. It is an island, so there's a coastline all around. There are beaches that are covered with seals. There's also sea lions on some of the beaches, and also penguins that you can see as well. But it was really about, kangaroos. Now, this is not like the lions in India. You don't have to hope that you're going to get to see kangaroos. You can't avoid seeing kangaroos. In fact, if you're not careful, you're going to see them when you don't want to see them, like when you're driving your car at dusk or early in the morning. In fact, that's the biggest problem is hitting kangaroos while you're driving in the dark. And so, they're all over the place. You can just get off the side of the road, go walking through a forest, and actually see them in sort of a more natural kind of habitat rather than sprawled on the road. Now, this is where I stayed one night. Unfortunately, only one night in this place. This is maybe, in my mind, in my opinion, maybe the best place I've ever stayed in my life. This is called Southern Ocean Lodge. It's on the cliffs overlooking the Southern Ocean. And next stop is Antarctica. And actually, there we go. I think in this picture, you can't make it out, but that's where the lodge is. So you can see this lodge is built to blend in with the environment, and there's no other development around. This is the only development that got permission to build. This is like a nature reserve, and they're the only ones who got permission to actually build, this lodge in this location. And it's beautiful, so you can walk along the cliffs, and again, you have the cliffs to yourself. They're the only people who you're going to find on those cliffs are other people who are staying, at the lodge. And this was actually one of my favorite activities, is just sitting in my room on the sofa. Every room has a sofa as well as a bed. And it's walled in, the whole wall is glass, even the bathroom. So you're taking a shower and you're looking out at the scenery. You're in the toilet, you're looking out at the scenery. And there's complete privacy. There's nobody out there, so you can do all those things without fear of anybody actually spying on you. But this is how, this is how I wanted to spend my time. Some of my time anyway was just sitting in my room, my feet propped up, just looking at the ocean and listening to the sounds of the waves crashing on the rocks, below. Now, let me tell you, I was told that the price of this room, and this wasn't the high-end room, in this place, was $1,000 a night per person. So it's pretty pricey, but that includes all meals, includes all alcohol, includes whatever excursions you want to do. They'll take you to go see kangaroos, they'll take you to go see seals, you can go walking on the cliffs, all of that is included, in that price. But, that's a bit pricey. Speaking of pricey, the last trip I'm going to talk about is Antarctica. This is maybe my most favorite destination in the entire world. I think I may have said that about a couple other places, so sometimes I lose track. But this is really it. I actually did the expedition cruise in November, and there's another way to get to Antarctica, which I'll also describe in a couple of minutes, flying into Antarctica from Chile, from Punta Arenas, Chile. The expedition cruises leave from Ushuaia, Argentina. They also leave from destinations in New Zealand and South Africa as well. But for those of us in North America, the best place to go is to Ushuaia, which is the southern tip of Argentina, the southern tip pretty much of South America. You get on a boat, not a big boat, not a big cruise ship. This is an expedition cruise. In fact, my advice is to not go. There are some bigger ships that actually do go to Antarctica, but you don't want to be on a ship that's too big because you're not able to get into the places that the small ships can get into. And you won't be able to go ashore as easily from a big ship. The advantages of the big ship is they're a little bit more stable because for 2 days before you get to the Antarctic Peninsula, you're passing through the roughest body of water in the world, the stormiest and the roughest. And the ship that we were on, for those 2 days, it was like this. You know, what do they call it? Sea surf. Sea surf, you know. And it was like that for 2 full days. I don't get seasick that easily. I wore a patch, I had no problem. The only problem I had was bouncing off the walls, you know, in my stateroom. In fact, taking a shower, well, forget it. You don't take a shower, and you're sure as hell not going to shave, you know, if you're smart, while this is going on. But you know, it's pretty rough, and a lot of people did get sick. But the reward is, and now I hope I haven't overstated this, my superlatives, but I think that this is the most beautiful scenery, you know, in the world. I mean, it's an otherworldly place. There's no place else on Earth like it. You know, what I find is I've been to Antarctica twice. Now, what I find is that when I tell people about Antarctica, or I say, hey, I'm going to Antarctica, 2 out of 3 people I talk to will go, oh, yeah, why? Why are you going there? And 1 out of 3 will get glassy-eyed. Say, oh, yeah? So there's something that resonates with certain people. And as a psychologist, I'm actually still trying to figure out what that is. And I think there's something about that otherworldliness, there is the remoteness. In the article that I just wrote about this trip, I talk about it's really the only place that I really believe in the infinite. You know, that you have a sense that there is something that extends, you know, to infinity, you know, outside the confines of my own head. And so Antarctica is that kind of place for certain kinds of people. So in any case, it's a spectacular scenery. So this is a typical scenery from the ship. And then if you're on the right ship, you have what are called Zodiac excursions. We were in the Zodiac at least twice a day, sometimes more. And sometimes you cruise around in the Zodiac so that you can get up closer to these icebergs, and you can actually get to examine them somewhat more closely. And then if that's not enough, on many of the ships you have an opportunity to go kayaking for a couple of hours. And this was we did 2 hours of kayaking in a place called Paradise Harbor. And that's exactly the way I felt about it. I felt like I was in paradise. Now, maybe I have a warped notion of paradise. Most people think of paradise, you know, tropical breezes and, you know, palm trees that sway and all that. You know, I think of big things of ice. I don't know. So maybe that's a little bit weird on my part. But this was, you know, we're surrounded. I mean, you're surrounded by this vast wilderness of ice and snow, and, you know, and it's beautiful, and the sun is reflecting off of everything, and you know, and the mountains are reflected in the water. You know, it was just 2 hours of absolute bliss. And of course, it wouldn't have been bliss if you fell in the water. I mean, but they're very, very careful. You're in 2-person kayaks, which are very, very stable. They always have a Kodiak close by, just in case anybody does go in, they'll get you out, you know, very quickly. So it's actually a fairly safe, you know, activity. And then there are excursions on land, where the Zodiacs would land. We'd go walking around a little bit. There are some old whaling stations that you get to visit. But the most important thing for most people are the penguins and the penguin colonies. And we saw thousands of penguins. You know, every day we're visiting another penguin colony, to the extent by the 5th day, oh, we're going to go see some more penguins. Oh boy, big deal. Now, you know, the penguins are great. You know, you can look at them forever. And so I have hundreds of penguin pictures, which I edited down to about half a dozen. These are actually, these are chin straps. Yeah, see the distinctive marking on these penguins. These are chin strap penguins. The ones before that are Gen 2s. So they're the 2 most common. Actually, the Gen 2s are the most common that you're going to see in this area of the peninsula. And seals. We actually saw lots of seals as well, usually floating on ice floes as we were doing our zodiac tours around the area. Now, just very briefly, I'm going to tell you about another way to go to Antarctica if you're really adventuresome and if you're really willing to spend the money. You can actually fly into the interior of Antarctica. Now, I had it listed here as Patriot Hills Camp, but I've been told that they've actually moved the camp, so it's no longer in Patriot Hills. I don't know the new location. But basically, you fly in from Punta Arenas, Chile, on a Russian cargo plane. So they got passenger seats sort of bolted into the fuselage. So you sit up here, and all the gear is here, and so you land on the interior. And I have to tell you how this landing happens. It's you can't see anything because there's no windows. This is a cargo plane. So you're sitting there, and you know that you're coming in for a landing, but you have no idea whether you're 1,000 feet up or 10 feet up, and then all of a sudden you hit, and it's what's called a natural ice airstrip. There's nobody's made an airstrip there. It's a piece of ice that is kept clear of snow by the winds coming down out of the hills, these hills back here. Most of the time. Sometimes it doesn't happen, and they have to cancel the flights. But and also they don't use any brakes. So you land, you hit, and then you're bouncing and bouncing and bouncing, and it takes actually a couple minutes before the plane will actually come to a halt. And the way that the pilot, it's all Russian crew, and it's sort of a stereotypical Russian crew, the red noses from drinking too much vodka. At least that was my imagination. I was just hoping they weren't drinking vodka while they were flying. But the way in which the pilot is able to find the strip is that there is a person at one end and a person at the other end with mirrors. And they're flashing the mirrors in the eyes of the pilot. So the pilot lines up the two mirrors, and that's where he knows, to land this plane. So it's really, the adventure begins when you get on the plane. And then this is where you stay. This is the camp. My tent, I think my tent was about there. This is the dining tent, and this is the urinal. And then what I'm not showing you is the ice toilet. So you could sort of use your imagination to figure that out. So, like I said, it's pretty rustic. And this trip, when I took it in 2002, it was about $14,500. Now it's up to about $17,000. And that does not include going to the South Pole. If you want to go to the South Pole, it's another $10,000 more. So their insurance costs are very high. That's one of the reasons for this trip. Pardon me? Oh, there's no dogs. Okay. No, you're not allowed to introduce any. Actually, they tried to a number of years ago, and the plane crashed, actually. And the dogs got loose, but they all died anyway. But you're not allowed to introduce any organisms. All of, I don't know if you want this kind of detail, but all waste, human waste, is taken out. So they use these barrels. So the barrels that you fly in with that have the fuel that they need to run the base are filled with human waste on your way back. So the advice I was given was sit as far to the front of the plane as possible because it's a 4.5-hour flight, and by the time you get to Punta Arenas, it's beginning to melt. So and I was very glad that I was given that advice. In any case, this is, this day in particular, the lighting was a little bit overcast, so we had some very eerie lighting. And to me, this was maybe the most magical day that I've ever had in my adventure travel, life. Just being out, and this is now, we're 20 miles from that camp. We're actually our camp was too busy, was not remote enough. So we decided that we're going to go 20 miles away, about a dozen of us, and with tents, and we're going to set up our own camp, but it's even more remote. And so this is what we were doing. So we are as remote as I have ever been in my life, and possibly we are as remote as anybody on Earth at that moment. But in any case, these are pictures that I took when we were out there, and if you're looking for otherworldly, this is obviously it. So, all right, those are the trips. Now let me give you some tips that if you can follow these tips, nothing's guaranteed, so I can't ensure transformative experiences, but at least it will increase your possibilities of having a very fulfilling, trip. And so the first thing, and this is probably the most important, get a realistic preview of the demands of the trip. Now this is the most important. Brochures are great, and what the tour operators want you to do, they want you to sign up, because it means money. So you can't count on the tour operators to screen you out. You can't count on the tour operators to say, I don't think that you are up to the demands of this trip. You've really got to make that decision yourself. And the way you do it is that you ask as many questions as you can. You talk to the tour operators. You talk to guides if they'll put you in contact. If they won't put you in contact with guides, forget that company. Or talk to other people who have taken the trip to get specifics. So a description like easy, moderate, or challenging is really not all that helpful. In what way is it challenging? High altitude, rough roads, rough trails, camping, rough accommodations. You really need to know those details. And then once you get that information, then you can make the decision whether this trip is for you or not. And then I strongly advise, especially for a trip that is physically challenging, is that you get to the gym and you hire a personal trainer. And you tell that trainer, hopefully you hire a good personal trainer, you tell that trainer what this trip is going to be like, what you're training for, and have that trainer put together a program. And if you can do it, try to give yourself a good 3 months, if not more, for the more challenging trips. This is maybe the second most important advice I can give you is get emergency evacuation insurance and get the right insurance. Look at the details of these policies and make sure that it's a insurance that can get you wherever you are and will take you to not the nearest medical center, but the nearest medical center that is able to treat your situation. On one of the trips I took a couple years ago, I met a guy who the year before, or maybe it was 2 years before, suffered a massive heart attack on a river in Maine, and he had the wrong kind of medical insurance. They evacuated him and they took him to a local community center, a health center, and he was having a massive heart attack, and they weren't able to give him the latest treatment, so he lost a significant function of his cardiopulmonary function. And the trip that I was on with him, he said, this is the last trip of this sort that I can do, because he just wasn't up to it anymore. And if he had the right kind of insurance that took him to a hospital in a major city, for example, he might have done a hell of a lot better. Buy and bring custom earplugs. I got these before going to India, and they cost about $125. India, Southeast Asia. If you're in Southeast Asia on a Saturday night, chances are there's going to be a wedding. And even if that wedding isn't that close to you, you're going to hear it. And it's going to last all night long. So if you want to get a good night's sleep, you need something like this. If you're in the cities in India, I have trouble sleeping with noise. So if you're at all noise sensitive, custom earplugs are a must to travel with. A headlamp. How many people have a headlamp? Do you know what? Now, the reason I use the headlamps, you're in a hotel room or B&B or even camping, and you get up in the middle of the night, and if I'm traveling with my wife, I don't want to wake my wife up, so I'm not going to turn the room light on. So use the headlamp to get around. But the most important thing for me for the headlamp is I get jet lag. I mean, I don't. When I travel, it takes me a few days before I start sleeping, normally. And to me, there's nothing worse than waking up at 2 a.m., in a foreign country, in an unfamiliar hotel room. It's pitch dark, and you can't get back to sleep again because your body is telling you it's 7 a.m., time to get up. And so what are you going to do? You're going to lie there for 4 or 5 hours until the sun comes up, or what I do is I put my headlamp on, I get the book. I always make sure I have a book that I'm really involved in. I get it out and I'll sit and read for a couple hours. I might get sleepy, then actually fall back to sleep. And also walking poles if you're going to be doing any hiking at all. And also, I recommend wear what I'm wearing. Now, I'm not going to give you this. I'm just going to, but I'm sure many of you probably have this kind of gear. It's lightweight travel gear you can get at REI or what's this? LL Bean, Magellan. You know, any store that specializes in travel and outdoor will sell this stuff. It's lightweight. If it gets wet, it dries quickly. If you need to wash it at night, you know, you wash it in the sink, you hang it up by morning, it's completely dry. The pants can be zipped off, so you can convert a pair of long pants into shorts. And maybe even more important is to be able to convert your shorts back into long pants when you're going to visit a temple, you know, or a cathedral. So it's very versatile and very comfortable, and also good walking shoes. You need to have good walking shoes. In fact, just this past Sunday in the New York Times travel section, there was an article on shoes that they recommend for walking around in cities. These are shoes that are recommended by guides who lead trips in cities. Try, and this can be difficult because you know these trips can be very busy, but if you can, try to find time just to sit by yourself and just think about, you know, your day. Think about the experiences you've had. Reflect on it. And if you're so inclined, keep a journal or notes. That's a way to reinforce your memories. And the memories will stick around longer if you've actually written them down. And later on, you can always go back, you know, to your notes to refresh your memory about what it was that you experienced. Related to that, edit your photos as soon after the trip as possible. If you don't do it soon, you'll probably never get around to it. I have boxes of photos from trips I've taken years ago that I've just never gotten around to. And you know, without organizing them, without putting them in a photo album, it's almost like the photos of that trip, they're not lost, but they're just not easily accessible. And I sort of regret that I wasn't more conscientious back then. And then sort of related to that, if you're so inclined, you know, write a story. Whether it's for you, for your grandkids, you know, if you blog, you know, that's always a good way to do it. Or even if you want to write a story and submit it to your local newspaper, see if you can get it published. But when I write stories, it brings me right back to that experience. And for a couple of days that I'm actually writing the story, it actually takes me more like 3 or 4 days to actually write the story. I'm there, you know, and even if I'm, you know, taking a break from the writing and I go in my house and I wash the dish or something like that, I'm sort of still back there. And, you know, in some part of my mind, I'm still reliving, you know, that trip. So writing a story is a good way, again, to reinforce the memory of that trip and to relive it again. And it's not quite as much fun as originally, unless it was a miserable trip. And then writing the story and reliving it is actually better because I always forget the bad stuff. But you know, it's really just a great way to bring back that experience, you know, as much as possible. So I think that's all I have to say. I hope I didn't run over too long. Many of these adventures are described in my book, which I understand is back there. If you want to buy it, I'd be happy to sign it for you. And also, if you are interested, I am going to start blogging about my trips, and I'm leaving on Monday for Russia. And I'm going to initiate my new blog with that trip. So if you're interested in following my adventures as I go from St. Petersburg to Moscow, through Siberia, Mongolia, Beijing, and Shanghai over the space of 23 days, just check out my webpage because there'll be a link and a sort of a teaser for my blog entries, you know, on my webpage. So thank you very much.